This Ask HershNoeie is actually something that is really cute. I have a 13-year-old that is writing to me. She's 12, about to be 13. And it's really sweet. I That's why I have to be very careful in terms of some of the things I say on here because the girls in school, their teachers and stuff used to follow the page. So I want to make sure I keep things good. And this is one of the reasons. Hi, my name is Hannah, and I have questions about Tacoma. I go to school in Tacoma. Excuse me, and excuse me, and I love it. I'll soon be 13. My question will be about the housing in Tacoma. I had did a paper about this before, but I wanted to know what happens when there's no room for more people and more people keep coming. What happens? Okay, that's a great question, Hannah. Well, Tacoma will continue to keep growing. Typically, cities will grow to a certain point and then they kind of plateau. And Tacoma is kind of one of those cities where it has grown and grown and grown, but the population keeps inching up, but it starts to somewhat plateau or level out. And the reason for that is because there's just, like you said, not enough places for people to live until other projects come along, apartment buildings, more houses that may pop up on two lots. So, for example, if your yard space is big enough, technically your parents could sell one side of that, and if it's big enough, and basically another house can be put on it. That happens, but it's not as fast as it needs to be in order to make a difference. Most of the time, it's going to be these mid-rise, these apartment buildings that you see mostly downtown, but you see them around town where they have several stories to them. All apartments up above, typically, and maybe some retail down below, which is stores, shops, things like that. There will come a point where the when you build up, it becomes expensive. The higher up you go, the more expensive it is. There will come a point where Tacoma will start to build taller once available land gets more scarce, meaning not as much as what you may see. Sometimes you'll see vacant lots throughout the city, and those are prime opportunities. Once that happens, then you're correct. We run out of space unless people sell their homes and a developer buys it. And that actually is what happens. If you look, for example, at the Ballard community up in Seattle, if you've been up there, take a look at that. If you or the best one is Capitol Hill. Capitol Hill is probably a better example because you can look back and see a lot of the past photos, but it was a mostly residential area. And if you look at it today, you see apartment towers and things like that, more mid-rises, and there's still single-family homes, but they're peeling them away slowly. And then if you look at downtown Tacoma, eventually, as cities start to do that, it becomes more and more urbanized. So you start to see more concrete, less greenery, and you start to see more traffic, more people, more cars, more everything. And that's typically what you will see. It's a slow process, but basically an area can become more urbanized. In Tacoma, a place that would be more urbanized, and you see that transition is along MLK in Hilltop. If you notice by the hospitals, very urbanized. As you go over towards 19th Street, you're in an urban environment, but there's a lot of houses, a lot of yards and things like that. Over time, people will possibly sell their home, and if their lot is big enough, a developer may say, you know what, this is a very highly prized area, similar to Capitol Hill. And so they may put an apartment building right there. And people are going to say, you know what, I don't want to live next to an apartment building. I just don't. So they may sell their home, and then guess what? Another developer will buy that land. And over time, those areas become more and more urbanized. So, yes, as more people move in, Tacoma has basically this glass ceiling. But the ceiling keeps moving upwards because we have the ability to keep growing because of these mid-rises that are being put up, right? You look at the mall sub area, if you look at, and sub area just basically means all around the mall itself within so many feet or miles. And that area is about to experience more housing. Why? Well, because, I mean, the mall is growing. They're adding a lot of new stores and shops. And so developers feel that they have a lot of confidence in the area, right? It may have its issues, but there's a lot of confidence. So they put apartments there because for some people, that's important. To be close enough to the mall, to walk to it, that's important. For others who are just the occasional shopper, and I never really go to the mall, we may not want to live there. So we may want to live either further away from the core, further away from the mall, and so people live in residential homes. But again, when you look at some of the policies the city has adopted, it makes it where even homeowners can add dwellings on their property, another space where people can live. And over time, that incrementally urbanizes a residential area, right? Because as more people move in, even if you don't see the big buildings and all of that, as more people move in to an area, there's going to be a need for more services, right? Sewer lines may need to be updated. The water system, like in terms of pipes and all of that stuff, may need to be updated. Roads may need to be updated. Sidewalk improvements. It's a slow process when you're looking at it, but it does happen. It's a gradual thing. So you'll start seeing more businesses locate, or maybe a developer will buy an old building or some piece of land and they put in a small strip center. So it may just be a retail building that has 4 or 5 units. And so the slow incremental urbanization happens over a period of years. It could take decades. I mean, again, Capitol Hill didn't grow like that in 10 years. It took decades, well back into the 70s when I was born, so 78. So and even before. So it is a slow process. And so what you see now is more of an urban environment. When you go throughout Seattle, if you're on the light rail and you go from Westlake up to the university, you're going to see nothing but urbanism all over. Right? And in the university area in Seattle, you're seeing more big, tall buildings that didn't exist before. And so it's that slow, incremental urbanization. And so in places like Seattle, it's more fast and it's more apparent than it is in places like Tacoma. But you notice in places like the Dome District, that's another example of this incremental urbanization. There are areas that used to be small warehouses or storage areas, and those have been knocked down, and now you see apartment buildings. Or you may see where it was a small local store, or what have you, back in the day. And so a developer will buy that because the land is much more affordable, the demand for housing is high. So they will buy that, knock it down, and put an apartment building up. And as they do so, they make street improvements as well. It could be with their application with the city, or maybe the city is requiring it, that they have to do improvements to the sidewalk or whatever the case may be. And so sometimes to the road. So these developers slowly create the urbanization that you see along with the city. So it's those two forces that kind of help encourage that over time. So it's not a rapid thing, but it does happen. So it's a slow process. And I think for your sake, if you were to go to the Dome District, it's an area to take a look at. It is an area that historically has not had a lot of homes and apartments. It's mostly been warehouses and businesses that supported those warehouse jobs. So you had places where you could go and eat, or where people can kind of go and relax. It even has an old motel and places to go get gas, because it was mainly an area for light industrial and mostly warehouses. The port area is over there, so it kind of helped feed into that. It's along where there's excuse me, freight and everything else. So all those industries were very big back in the day. Now they're starting to slow down, and the industrial pieces are moving into other areas of the city. And the Dome District is slowly converting from being a warehouse and light manufacturing area. It still does have that, over into being more of a residential neighborhood. And so that process is pretty fascinating. You see slowly things change, right? A good example is tracks. Now, it's kind of a bad example too, because they've stopped work on it, but that used to just be a storage yard and nothing else. Now you're seeing that there's going to be hopefully a building that will rise. They've already kind of done some of that, and that urbanizes that area. Down the street, there's another apartment building going up, and so that will kind of urbanize that. In other areas, there will be more apartment buildings that will slowly rise once the financial situations get a little stronger. And so that creates an area that normally did not have that. It had storage and warehouse. And now it's hundreds of people who will be living in an area that it typically did not have that. So as a result, those hundreds of people need creature comforts. They need places to go eat. They need places to go shop. And so a lot of these buildings will have retail space, which is critically needed in the Dome District. There's not a lot of it. So even with Freight House Square there, it's mostly fully booked in terms of tenants, and it doesn't fit every retailer's need. But as these buildings develop, they add retail space. And so that changes things. If you go up a little bit on 25th Street, you will see that basically it's right there in the Brewery District and kind of in the Dome District, but it is Cornice House, which is right there on Pack Avenue and 25th Street. That building used to be just a scuba shop. It was a fairly decent size one-story building that was a scuba shop, and that's cleared out, and now you have almost 200 apartment units plus 3 retail spaces that will be there. That's that slow incrementalism that I was talking about in terms of urbanization. If you look across the street, there is that other building that used to be some sort of I forget what it was, dairy place. But around that general area, Tacoma Flats was redeveloped. It was a hotel and it had people in it, but it was redeveloped to be apartments. That's that slow urbanization. Berliner, which put in the their place, this German pub, that happens. And then next to them is Mariano Pies, which hopefully they will open up soon. That's that. And then next to that, all of that other stuff will eventually be torn down, and the people that are developing Cornice House will build another apartment building, right? About equal size in terms of number of units. But again, it's taken an area that really was not being used, and what was being used was mostly just storage, and it's clearing all of that out, and it's adding another 200 units. So just within that small area, you have about 500 units of apartments overall. And so that, or about 450, let's say, that amount of units, and I normally double that, right? So if there's about 450 units, you're expecting close to 900 to 1,000 people who will be living in that tiny area, right? Just in a block. And so that is what slowly happens. And while we say that's downtown and all of that, if you look over time, even New York City, there were areas that were mostly housing. And over time, it became where that was not suitable enough because the population demand was so high, and it urbanized pretty quickly. Here, we're not in that age anymore, right, of fast industrialization and fast urbanization, not in this country. There are certain places where you kind of see that, Austin, Vegas, Seattle to a degree, but it's not where you visibly see it so quickly. And so Tacoma, it's on a very slow pace compared to some of these other areas, but it's still fairly rapid. And so you'll see things change over time where it was not something that was active before and didn't have too many people before to be in a place that's starting to actually hum with a lot of urbanization. I'll finish with this. Right there where the Berliner is, across the street, is a bank. It was US Bank, and that bank has since closed and the land is for sale. More than likely, a developer will buy that land, tear the bank down, and you guessed it, probably put up another mid-rise building. And the reason why that would make sense is because the transportation line that runs through there, the Tacoma Link, runs right through there on Pack Avenue. So that's great. A lot of developers want to have quick access to transportation, and that means there's less parking that would be needed, and it's more convenient for their tenants. Excuse me. And so you're probably going to see more residential there as well, and more retail there. So that's across the street from all this other stuff. And so an area right now that doesn't really it looks urbanized, right? But it kind of is whatever. Not a lot of activity going. You'll eventually start to see more development there. They'll buy that building because it's no use for US Bank. They've already consolidated where they want to put their stuff at. And that area will probably in the next 5 years be unrecognizable. If you left, went someplace and came back, you wouldn't even be able to recognize it. So it's a slow process. But yes, right now we're in that pinch point of there's a lot of residential homes, and a lot of developers may buy a house and they may let it sit, or they may rent it out. And then when the next house becomes available, they may buy that house. They tear them down, and then they put up a building, right? Or they can turn a house into a duplex based on whatever the laws are with the city and things like that. And usually that may be enough for people to say, I don't want to live next to a duplex or a triplex, which means there's 3 units, or a fourplex where there's 4 units. Some people may say, I don't want that. So if they leave and move and they're homeowners, that developer may buy that and say, cool, I have 2 where I can do that. And eventually people are like, I don't want to live next to it. So it's a slow process. But once you see it, it does happen. So yes, we will continue to grow in terms of population. We do have a lot of homes, and eventually downtown will probably run out of space many years from now. But the future would be to basically slowly add more density, which is what you're seeing in the Dome District, and that will accommodate a lot more people that currently did not exist before in that area. So hope that answered your question, Hannah. Thank you so much for it. Hope you do well in school. That's coming up soon. And until next time, I will see you. Take care.